Well, welcome. In a couple of lessons ago, we learned about how to add, subtract, and multiply polynomials. But did you wonder why we didn't learn how to divide polynomials? Well, you're going to see why in this lesson, because dividing polynomials is not exactly the easiest process. Now, there are a couple of ways that we can do this, and it's important to know both of them. Okay, so I'm going to show you two methods as far as how you can divide polynomials. But one of the methods requires us to remember how to do traditional dividing, just like how to divide two normal numbers. So we're going to do this as a warm-up. I'm going to have you divide using long division 105 divided by 5. I don't want you to use your calculators here. I want you to use long division. So what do I mean by that? That means digging deep into your elementary roots and remembering how to divide using long division. So I want you to do that for both of these problems. One of those might require you to find a remainder, so there'll be something left over. But you need to understand the process. So why don't you guys go ahead and pause the video and try doing this on your own, and then we'll go through how to do both of these together. All right, well, how did you do? Let's check. So we're going to actually walk through this warm-up together. So for this first one, when we go to divide using long division, what you do is you start with the first two numbers. So there, because 5 is not going to 1. Okay, so we'll go to, so 5 is going to the first number. Does 5 go into the first two numbers? 5 definitely divides into 10, and it actually goes in there evenly. So 5 goes into 10 two times. So we want to put that 2 above the 0, okay, because 5 times 2 is 10. And then we're going to subtract those. 10 minus 10 is 0. So now I'm just going to bring down the 5. Now I want to see, does 5 go into 5 evenly? Yeah, 5 goes into 5 evenly one time. And 1 times 5 is 5. 5 minus 5 is 0, so we don't have a remainder. So 105 divided by 5 is 21. Now you might say, well, I could have done that without a calculator. Fine, you probably very well could have. But believe me, for this lesson, you need to understand how to do long division. You need to understand the process. Let's try another one here. Let's do this one. If we had 17, or 229 divided by 17. So when I divide this, 17 doesn't go into 22 evenly, but it does go in there one time. So if I put 17 underneath here, the next step is to subtract. And 22 minus 17 is 5. Now I'm going to bring down the 9. Now 17 does not go into 59 evenly, but the closest we can go into 59 without going over is 17 times 3. So 17 times 3 is 51. So when I subtract those, I get 8, meaning that I have a remainder of 8. So we would say it's 13 with a remainder of 8, or if we would write that as a fraction, it would be 13, and then the remainder we write as a fraction of what we were dividing by. So 13, remainder 8 would be 13 and 8/17. If you did not remember how to do that, it's important that you figure it out, because that is what we're doing for this lesson. So let's look at how we can divide x cubed plus 5x squared plus 6x plus 9 divided by x plus 3 using long division. Okay, so here's the process. Okay, so the process of dividing by a polynomial using long division is very similar to long division of just regular numbers. So here's how we're going to set that up. So we're going to set it up with that bar. So we're going to divide. So we're going to put x plus 3 on the outside, just like when I had 229 divided by 17. We had 17 on the outside and 229 on the inside. So we put what we're dividing by on the outside. And then we look at, so we have x cubed plus 5x squared. And so don't worry so much about anything else other than the x cubed. What you want to do is you want to say, okay, what would I multiply that x from out front? Here, let me get my highlighter. What would I multiply x by to get x cubed? Well, x times x squared would give me x cubed. So what we're going to do now is we're going to multiply the x and the 3 by x cubed. I'm sorry, by x squared. So when we do that, we get x cubed plus 3x squared. Don't worry about that minus right now. So x squared times x would be x cubed. X squared times 3 would be 3x squared. Now remember what we did when we were dividing by 17 into 229. After multiplying 1 times 17 and getting 17, and what we did is we subtracted as the next step. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to subtract, but we're going to subtract everything by, so we're going to subtract everything. So x cubed we're going to subtract, and 3x squared we're going to subtract that. So what I like to do is I like to write out, let me grab my pen here. I just like to write down minus x cubed and then minus 3x squared. So I'd like to distribute the minus through. So we would have x cubed minus x cubed would be nothing, and 5x squared minus 3x squared would be 2x squared. And then we bring down the 6x, and you can bring down the 9. If you wanted to bring down both of them, you can, or just one of them, it doesn't matter. But now we're going to look to see, well, what would I multiply? Let me get my highlighter. What would I multiply x by to get 2x squared? Well, I would multiply, that would be 2x, because 2x times x would be 2x squared. So we would put 2x up above there. So now we would multiply 2x times both the x and the 3. So again, we multiply all of that by 2x. And when you do that, we get 2x squared plus 6x. Now we're going to subtract. Now again, I like to distribute that through. So I would write this as minus 2x squared minus 6x. So now 2x, so we always subtract. So 2x squared minus 2x squared is 0. 6x minus 6x is also 0. So that leaves us with 9. And so that means that our remainder is going to be 9, because there's nothing that I would multiply x by to get 9. So what do we do with that remainder? So just like when we had a remainder of 8 with the 7, when we were dividing 229 divided by 17, and we had a remainder of 8, remember we wrote that as a fraction. So we're going to do the same thing here. So with the 17, 229 divided by 17, we wrote our answer as 13 and 8/17. So for this, we're going to write it as our answer is x squared plus 2x plus our remainder. So our remainder was 9, so plus a remainder of 9 over x plus 3. So you can't see that there, but so again, so we could write it as, so our dividend was what we're dividing, x cubed plus 5x squared plus 6x plus 9 is equal, so we could, so this is just saying that we could factor this down to be x squared plus 2x times x plus 3 plus a remainder of 9. But this is the key here. I'm going to highlight this. This is what you want to make sure that you get in your notes. When we take our dividend divided by our divisor, so the dividend is the big number that we're dividing by with our small, like 229 divided by 17. 229 would have been our dividend. Our divisor would have been 17. So our answer is going to be our quotient plus our remainder divided by our divisor. Okay, so that's how you're going to write your answers for these. All right, let's look at another one. So now sometimes when we go to divide, so this time our divisor is 2x plus 3. Our dividend, what we're going to be dividing up, is the x cubed plus 27. If you notice, it goes from x cubed all the way jumping into 27. So we're missing an x squared, we're missing an x. It's really important when we're doing long division, if there's any pieces that we're missing, to replace those with 0, x, whatever. Okay, so it's important that we place those, that we hold those positions with zeros and whatever piece is missing. So here we're missing, like we said, we're missing a 0x squared and we're missing a 0x. So we're going to replace those, like I said, with zeros. So here we could see the answer, but I'm going to show you step by step how we would do this problem. So first off, we would look to see, well, what would we multiply, let me get my highlighter, what would we multiply 2x by to get 8x cubed? Well, that would be 4x squared. So next, we take 4x squared times both the 2x and the 3. So 4x squared times 2x is 8x cubed, and 4x squared times 3 is 12x squared. Remember, next we subtract. So we subtract, that's going to be minus x squared minus 12x squared. So we subtract those, we get negative 12x squared, and then we bring down the 0x, or we bring down the 27. So now I'm going to look to see, well, what would I multiply? Because I'm going to ignore that. What would I multiply 2x by? So let me erase this. What would I multiply 2x by to get a negative 12x squared? Okay, so that's what we're trying to figure out. What would we multiply 2x by to get negative 12x squared? Well, that would be a negative 6x. Negative 6x times 2x is negative 12x squared. So then we would have, so we multiply everything by negative 6x. So when you do that, negative 6x times 2x, that would be a negative 12x squared. So there's a typo there. Whoops. Too many things happening here. Let me get my pen. So that should have been a negative. So negative 6x times 2x would be negative 12x squared. Negative 6x times 3 would be negative 18x. So the next step would be to subtract. Now when we subtract a negative, it's going to become a positive. And then that's going to also become a positive. Okay, so that's really important. When you subtract a negative, those becomes a positive. So when we add those together, negative 12x squared plus 12x squared would be 0. 0x plus 18x would be 18x. And then we bring down the 27. So now we got to figure out, well, what would we multiply 2x by? Let me get my eraser here, my highlighter. We want to figure out what would we multiply 2x by to get 18x? Well, that would be 9. Okay, so we put a 9 there. So now we multiply everything by 9. So 9 times 2x would be 18x. 9 times 3 would be 27. And then our last step is to always subtract. And so when we subtract those, so again, that would be a minus 18x and a minus 27. So 18x minus 18x is 0. 27 minus 27 is 0. A lot of work, I understand. But again, you need to know this process. So when you get your answer, our answer would be, we divide those, would be 4x squared minus 6x plus 9 with no remainders. All right. I want you guys to try one. We're just going to try, I want you to just try one of these. So we're going to, now this time, it's a little different. We're going to have x squared minus 4x plus 3 that's going to go on the outside. So I'll just tell you that you're going to start out like this. We'd have x squared minus 4x plus 3. And our dividend is going to be x cubed minus 6x squared plus 11x minus 6. All right, so the process is still the same. So I want you guys to see if you can't try this one on your own. If you can't, I totally understand. If you just sit there and wait for me to go through it, I'm totally fine with that. But I would like you to at least try it a little bit to see if you can start this one out at least. But I want you guys to try that. So if you want, pause the video and then play when you're ready. Otherwise, just wait a second and then we'll go over it. All right, so let's see what you should do for this problem. I'm going to walk you through it. So again, our first step is you're going to look to see what would we multiply x squared by to get x cubed. Well, x times x squared would be x cubed. So we're just going to set up an x here. Now we're going to put that x, so it's important to line this up so that way you know when you're done. Okay, so if we're going to multiply by an x, we're going to put that x above just a plain old x in our dividend. So we're going to put the x above the 11x just to make sure it lines up so we know when we're finished. So now I'm going to multiply everything by x. So when I do that, I would get x cubed, which is what I wanted. And then x times negative 4x would be negative 4x squared. And x times 3 would be 3x. So it doesn't matter that there's 3 terms here. Your first and only goal is to always get rid of just that first term. So then remember, we're going to subtract everything. Now I like to, like I said, distribute that minus through. So this would be a minus, this would be a plus, this would be a minus. So now when we subtract those, x cubed minus x cubed is nothing. But negative 6x squared plus 4x squared is negative 2x squared. 11 minus 3 is 8x. And then we bring down the minus 6. There's just one thing to bring down there. So now I want to look to see what would I multiply x squared by to get negative 2x squared. Well, that would just be negative 2. So I am going to write negative 2 here. So what we're going to do is we're going to multiply everything by negative 2. So when we do that, we get negative 2x squared. And then negative 2 times negative 4x would be a plus 8x. And negative 2 times 3 would be negative 6. So remember, our next step is to subtract. Now we want to subtract everything. So now when I subtract a negative, this is going to become plus. Remember, what I'm doing is I'm distributing a negative through. Distribute a negative to everything. So that first term would become a plus. The second term now would become a negative. And the last term, a negative times a negative, would become a positive. And so when we combine those, negative 2x squared plus 2x squared, that's 0. 8x minus 8x is 0. Negative 6 plus 6 is 0. We don't end up with a remainder. So our answer when we divide those is just x minus 2. A long process, I understand. Okay, so we're going to learn a second way of how to divide. Now this way is a lot easier, but it only works when we have 2 terms like this one. X, when our divisor, what we're dividing by, is only 2 terms. So here we have x minus 3, so we can use this method. For the previous one that we were looking at, when we were dividing by 3 terms, Can't use what we call synthetic division. So you have to know how to use long division for certain problems. But if we only have two terms, we can always use what's called synthetic division, which is so simple. So let's see just how simple this can be. So again, it only works when there's two terms. And so the one thing that the book is going to say is we can only do it when our number, the leading coefficient for a divisor is 1. I'm going to actually show you a way that where it works when it's not 1 at the very end. But it is a lot easier though when the leading coefficient of our divisor is 1. What we're going to do is we're going to start by finding the 0 for the divisor. In other words, remember we did this when we were studying quadratics. To find a 0, you just set the factor equal to 0 and solve. So we would get x equals 3. So what we're going to do is we're going to put that divisor outside of here, and I'm going to put this weird, so it's almost like taking that dividing sign that we're used to and just flipping it upside down. That's not really what we're doing, but that's what it looks like. And then we're going to put the coefficients. Now I want to make sure that, again, that if we have any pieces that are missing, that we substitute those with 0. But we're going to put the coefficients for each term, starting with our degree all the way down to just our plain old number. So I see here that our first, again, we're not including any x's. I said coefficients. Remember, a coefficient is just a number. So we're going to have 2 here. And then, so that's from our leading terms, so that's where we have a degree of 3. And then we have a negative 7. The signs are very important here. So we'd have a negative 7 because we have a negative 7x squared. Now I'm missing my plain old x. So I'm going to have 0 x's in there. And then minus 4 is our last one. Now underneath, whenever we get to that very last number, I want you to put like a little basket down here. That is where we're going to catch our remainder if there is one. Now the book doesn't show you that if you use the book, but I always like this method just because you're going to see in the very end when we go to set up our answer, it's always easiest to have that remainder basket set apart. All right, so now it's just a simple process. Once you understand this process, you're going to really appreciate this method over the long division. But again, you still have to be familiar with long division for the certain problems like the one that you did on your own where we had 3 terms. This method won't work for 3 terms, remember. So the first step is you bring down whatever that first number is, 2. Whoa! If you're wondering what just happened and why I changed outfits so suddenly, it's because after recording this video, I discovered that I made a mistake in this problem. And so now I'm having to go back and redo this portion of it, and I'm not wearing the same sweatshirt I was wearing when I recorded it the first time. So, voila. Anyhow, let's carry on with where at this point I did have it correct. All right, so what we do is the first step when we're doing synthetic division, like I just mentioned, is you bring down whatever that first term is, in this case 2. And the reason why is because there's nothing to add to that 2. So 2 plus nothing is just 2. But then the next step is what we're going to do is we're going to multiply that 3 times 2. And when you multiply 3 times 2, we get 6. And so we put that 6 underneath that, in this case negative 7. And then we're going to add these together. And negative 7 plus 6 is negative 1. So that's how you get that next term. And so then to get the next term, we're going to take now 3 times negative 1. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. When we add these together, 0 plus negative 3 is negative 3. And guess what we're going to do now? We're going to take 3 times negative 3. 3 times negative 3 is, negative 9. Almost made another mistake. 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. And now when I add these two together, we get a remainder of negative 13. Now here's the deal. What's left over in that box, like we said a while ago when we were setting this up, what's left over in that box, that is your remainder. And the way that we're going to set this up is we need some variables in here. So our answer is not 2 minus 1 minus 3. Okay, that's not our answer. We need to put some variables in here. And so the first variable, when you're going, we're going to work our way from right to left. So the first number, the number closest to that box, is going to remain our constant. That means it's going to stay a number without a variable. But the next term, we would put in an x, and then the next term after that, you'd put in an x squared. So our answer is going to be, whoa, what happened there? Our answer is going to be 2x squared minus x minus 3. And then we could say either plus a negative 13, or we can say minus 13 over what we're dividing by, x minus 3. So this would be our answer. So you can see that this is much easier than what you guys did with using long division in that previous example. So Now, I am going to go back to the previous sweatshirt I was wearing and resume this video. So again, if you want to jump right in, and I'm going to help you set this up. Okay, let's do that. I'll help you set this one up, and I want you to see if you can carry it on from there. So our first step is to find our 0. So if you want to do it the long way, I mean, you'll get the hang of it where you can just look at it and find the 0. But I don't want you to think the 0 is -1. Don't make that mistake. If we set it equal to 0, x minus 1 equal to 0, and we solve that, we would get x equals 1. So our 0 is 1, so that's for our divisor. So that's what we're going to start out with. And then we're going to put just the coefficients. So the 3, put that here. Don't put that on the bottom, put it up on top. And then we're missing a 0, we're missing an x squared. So we'd have 0x squared, so I'm going to put a 0 there. And then we have -5x, and we have 10. And down here after the 10, put a little basket to catch our remainder. So now I want you to see if you can simplify this. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video, see if you can work this out using synthetic division to get a final answer. So go ahead, pause the video and hit play when you're ready to check to see if you did it correctly. All right, so let's see how you did here. Change my color. All right, so I'm going to bring down the 3. That's your first step. Then we multiply. 1 times 3 is 3. And then we're going to add those two together. 0 plus 3 is 3. Now we're going to multiply these together. So 1 times 3 is 3 again. -5 plus 3 is -2. So now we're going to multiply these together. So 1 times -2 is -2. 10 plus -2 is 8. So then as far as your answer, remember we have a remainder of 8, and then we're going to work our way from left to right. So the -2, again, no x is going to go with that. So we're going to start with our x to the left of that term, and then go in ascending order. So this would be x squared. So our answer would be 3x squared. Now that's a positive 3x, so I'm going to put plus 3x minus 2, plus our remainder of 8, divided by our original divisor, which is x minus 1. And there's your final answer. Now, what if, so remember we had that first one. What if we have two terms? Okay, so this has two terms, but we don't have a coefficient of 1 there. We have a coefficient of 2. Then what do? Well, I'm going to show you how to get their answer. Okay, if that's the case. What we're going to do is we want this to be 1, so I'm going to divide everything by 1. And when I say everything, I mean everything. And if it doesn't simplify evenly, leave it as a fraction. Okay, so our divisor now is going to be 2 divided by 2 is 1, so we're going to have x plus 3/2. And over here, we're going to have 4x cubed plus 27. That's what we're going to divide by. So our 0 in this case, if I set x plus 3/2 equal to 0 and solve it, I would get -3/2. Okay, and then we would go and put our numbers in. Now again, we're working with this one. Okay, so this is what we're dividing. So the 4 would be our coefficient that we would put there. Then we're missing a 0x squared. We're missing a 0x, and then we have our 27. Put a basket down here. You get a different color. It's too much red. All right, bring down the 4. So now if I take -3/2 times 4, -3/2 times 4 would be -12 over 2 is one way you could do it. -12 divided by 2 would be -6. 0 plus -6 would be -6. Now I'm going to take -6 times -3/2, which would be a positive 18 divided by 2, which is 9. 0 plus 9 is 9. Now I'm going to take 9 times -3/2, which gives me -27/2. And oops, I just realized I made a mistake. You're probably thinking, why did you put 27 and not 27/2? That was my bad, sorry. So this should have been back here. So again, 2 videos in a row where I make mistakes. So we would have 27/2. So we'd leave that as 27/2 in red. All right, so now going back to what we have in blue. So 9 times -3/2 would be -27/2. Now when I add those two together, we would end up getting 0. So we'd have a remainder of 0. So again, this is where we would have no x. Okay, that's just going to stay a 9, but this is going to be an x. This would be an x squared. So our answer would be 4x squared minus 6x plus 9, which is much easier than going through this whole process that we did originally. So again, if you ever end up with where you have two terms, you can always use synthetic division. It's just you want to make sure you divide by whatever this number is, divide everything by that number, and if it's a fraction, leave it as a fraction, but then that way we would have 1x. Okay, so before we use synthetic division, you always have to have 1x, or just a plain old x there. So that's the end of this video for our first lesson in lesson 3.4. So hopefully you have a better understanding of how to divide by polynomials, and we'll practice that more in class.